Welcome back to a new episode of the Threshold Lab podcast, and really excited today to welcome Phil Beckner, player development coach. I was super excited to bring in Phil, not only because of the reputation that he's built amongst the coaching community, but one of the things that I think makes your background unique is the fact that you've been a coach and a teacher at literally every level within the game of basketball. Not to mention also your appreciation for a lot of the things that this show feels called to explore, things around not only high performance, but things like mindset, mental performance, leadership, developing culture and standards, and all sorts of different things. So I was really excited to have this conversation because it's also one of the more challenging ones because there's so many avenues I think we can go within it. But more than anything, I'm excited to dive in today with you, Phil. So before we begin, I just want to thank you for your time and your presence here.
Zach, the feelings are mutual. I know you're going to be asking me a bunch of questions, but I want to learn from you. Obviously, we've been connected for a little while now, but the stuff you've done, the stuff you preach, the reason why you started this, makes me super passionate, makes me super excited. So couldn't wait to dive in.
Something that jumped out to me as I've kind of paid attention, obviously, different insights and things that you've shared both in public over or things in public over the course of time is a lot of stuff around just kind of player development. That's something that you're known for. That's something that you've not only developed some theories and beliefs around, but you've literally been in the gym sweating and training with guys and really just honing kind of your methodologies and what you see from that. Where I think I'd actually be really interested to begin with you is I've heard you reference this notion that there are certain separators for players and coaches too that help elevate them beyond and be really different than other people. Let's, I think, start there today. What are some of those separators that you see with kind of the world-class players and coaches that you serve?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. First of all, when you're talking player development, whatever sport it is, we're developing a person, we're developing a human still. And just, based on my background, and you alluded to it, I've coached junior high, high school, college, every level of college basketball. I've coached with the pros, NBA and G League now. But those separators were things we were looking for that required no talent that could give us an advantage. And I think whether you're in baseball, basketball, football, you could be, in the corporate world, or you could be two guys like us who are still, striving to get better. So over time, I just started to look at a lot of the things that players weren't doing or things players weren't doing that held them back from taking the next step. And eventually, and Zach, I haven't told you this, and I know you haven't, tapped into everything I do, but I've started, public speaking more. And one of my main keynotes is on the separators. And it's also going to be, I'm writing the Be Better, Be Different book right now that is a core 5 chapters. There are 5 main separators that we believe a coach, a player, a mom, a dad could have that will separate them from the majority. It might not always make them the best of the best, but man, let's just say when talent is equal or ability is equal, we want to be able to do these things in order to separate ourselves. You want me to give you some of them? I'm sure that.
I'd love to, yeah,
Okay,
maybe a
I'll give you
couple,
all
a little
five of them.
preview.
Yep, I'll
Okay.
give you all 5 of them quickly. I won't dive in. I don't know, where you want to go, but like, so these are, and again, what we try to do, and I love what you said earlier about teaching and methodology and philosophy. We know our way is not the only way. We know we're not perfect, but we do think these separators are followed in a linear order. You got to have one before the other. And when you use them, when the talent's equal or the ability's equal, you will continue to pass up your competition or separate yourself. So the first separator is showing up, like how you show up every day. Just the ability to show up, be prepared, know what direction you want to head, the ability to show up. The second one, which a lot of people, I think, preach the opposite of this. Like, you got to have great body language or you have bad body language. So we talk about developing your presence. What do people feel from you energy-wise? What do they see from you when you walk on the field, on the court, or you walk in a room? Are you conscious and are you intentional about developing your presence? The third one which is the super hard one. I think, most people struggle with is once you do those two things, you have to keep your commitments. You absolute like, and I've always said this, even back coaching college, the best of the best, they are who they say they are, and they do what they say they're going to do. Use the example, all the time. If you say you're a tough competitor, well, you got to do that all the time. If you say you're a reliable individual, you got to be reliable all the time. Once you've done those three things, the most powerful one, and it's the one I've tried to really separate myself in the last couple of years career wise, is impacting your teammates. And again, if you're in sports, you're going to word the teammates. In the business world, you might say coworkers, but impacting somebody else. And it's just it's a separator that one of my good friends, Stephen Mackey, always said. It's a separator that when you do it, you will never lose. He always says, if you help someone else win, you will never lose. And then the last one, and this is again a little bit against what our culture says. You get this great keynote, you go through these great, four separators. You're like, man, we're going to end it with something optimistic. But here's the true separator. I think after you follow these in a sequential order, it's the ability to take punches, the separator of taking a punch, because you're going to get hit, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to lose. And one thing we try to do with our players and our coaches that we're developing, everyone wants to develop people to be successful. Well, we also develop people to handle failure better because it's going to come. In your world, they talk about hitting slumps all the time. In our world, they talk about shooting slumps. So even though we had this phenomenal 3 months in the off season, that separator of taking punches, I'm going to talk to my guys in June and July and August about shooting slumps. So when they hit, it's not a surprise. When they hit, we're not just going down this deep, dark valley mentally, and struggling. So those are our five separators. We work on them. We follow them in a certain order. We dive into each one definition wise and really work to develop ourselves and communicate about them. And I think a lot of guys who've used them have had a lot of great results.
One of the things that I appreciate about those five is not only are they relevant and important for players, but they're just as irrelevant or just as relevant for leaders, coaches, and really anyway, parents. Like those are all principles and separators for any of us. And I think
Absolutely.
that's kind of the really cool part that I hear in that. And I think a couple of them that really stand out. I really love your notion of keeping your commitments. One
Mm,
of the things that we like to talk about is this notion that does your audio match your video? Or does your video match your audio, right? Like, is what you say align with what I see you do? And if there's a
absolutely.
disconnect there, then it can create this misalignment or this lack of integrity within your commitments. The other side of it too is I have people who are like, oh, I promise you this, I promise, or like, hey, I'll get back to you this. And it's like, if you don't, it's like there's a lot of times we give out or we hand out these empty promises, or we make these kind of empty commitments, and then next thing you know, there's a gap between us actually being responsible to deliver on those things. And that's one of the things that, like, I think about it with players. Coaches love players that are reliable. Like, you
Yes.
know what you're going to get, and
Yeah.
that's easier to then trust those. Well, again, that same thing can apply to any of us, whether you're a coach or leader and so on. So I love the versatility first and foremost of those five separators.
I appreciate it. I think the one too that, when you talk about commitments to piggyback off of that, I think when people now in our world, we're so designed to be selfish, look within, blame it on social media, blame it on whatever you want to. But we talk about commitments too. Like when you join a program or when you join a team, John Wooden used to say this all the time back in the day, you give up your rights and you gain responsibility. So we talk about when people are highly committed and buy into a program, and we talk about this with Oklahoma City Thunder when I worked for them, but you head a new direction, a better direction. When you don't buy in and you don't keep your commitments, you stay stuck and you don't head in that direction. And it's just unfortunate, in our culture, and especially with younger athletes nowadays. And again, we could look at it as adults, but even with younger athletes, they are not wired. And I also think they haven't been held accountable to keeping their commitments.
Mm, I think again, there's so much we can get into even just within the commitments, but the thing that I think also stands out is the fact that you've put a lot of thought into defining what those five separators are. That again, they're not just these empty phrases, but they show up not only in terms of being intentional with the language, but then what they look like in
Yes.
behaviors. I think the other piece of it, it ties so well into this. And I don't, forgive me, I don't know if you want to view it as a mantra, a philosophy statement, whatever it is, but I know the thing that you preach is this notion of be better, be different. And so for you, when you think about defining that for those that you lead, when it comes down to being better, being different, like what really goes into that?
Zach, that I think when you're talking development and us, whether it's your role, what you're doing with the Diamondbacks or what I'm doing with a maybe specific player for the Phoenix Suns, it's our job to drive performance, like you said, and even this podcast. Like we're trying to seek high performance, how to get people to perform better or do better. And I think some of the greatest coaches are the greatest teachers. And the greatest teachers, they find a way to communicate at an extremely high level. So if we're seeing and saying the same things, I think that's going to drive performance better and it's going to drive it faster. So that's why my staff, we are so big on defining these things, communicating them with the players, getting their feedback, because there's a lot of different definitions of hard work. There's a lot, like we have certain player standards we even go through, like, and one of our standards is you're going to be on time. Well, on time to some people mean, hey, if the workout's at 10, you're walking in the building at 10 a.m. Or for us, it's not that. So it's got to be clearly defined. So what we did with the message of better and different, I defined it and we defined it, the people I've worked with over years, on what some of the best have done, again, to separate themselves or put themselves on a higher level. So, and this used to be really cliche, I think, the word culture, or a buzzword of the word culture. It was so, and some people live it, some people believe it, some people post it on a wall. But your culture can be formed from the inside out or the outside in. Same thing spiritually. If anyone has any type of faith, it's like you're either going to believe, the Bible, or you're going to believe what the world says. Like, where are your thoughts? Where is everything formed? I think the best of the best always form things from the inside out. We don't want to be told, by whoever, whatever, what we're about. The world, I think, tells us better means more money, more talent, more followers, more status. That's the world. That's what the world tells us better is. After working with guys, especially a guy like Damian Lillard, who was a two-star athlete out of high school, went to Weber State, ends up being a Hall of Fame player, top 75 all time. I think everybody, I shouldn't say think, I believe everybody has a better within them. That is your greatest God-given gift, strength, or ability, whether that's personally or professionally. We all have something that will separate us, that will help us when our back's against the wall or when we're in another environment and things are tough, that we could rely on. It might be a great communicator, being a great teammate. It might be your ability to hit the ball or shoot the ball, whatever it is, but it's your better. So we define better, not by the world's definition, but by your greatest gifts, strengths, and abilities, what you have, what you possess. And then different, what we define that by is our character, our mentality, like what makes us who we are, what we believe, how we show up. And not to go too much into the definition type stuff, but everyone has all these different definitions of character. Like, character is who you are when no one's watching. Everyone's heard that forever. We always say your character is displayed by two things: your behaviors and your responses. If you want to know someone's mindset or their mentality, or you want to know someone's character, all you got to look at is how they behave on a day-to-day basis and how they respond. How they respond when something goes great, or how they respond when something goes bad, or how they respond when they don't get what they want, or when they do get what they want. So I know that's kind of a deep dive into that, but this is really, a mantra, a philosophy, like you said, a way of developing players mentally, physically, holistically, that we want to build a foundation from.
Again, I appreciate the depth and nuance within those and how you've kind of broken them down. And it's very clear and easy to see how they are aligned with those five separators, right? Those five separators fit in so well within that overarching maybe bucket of character of your behaviors as well as your responses. Where I'd kind of be curious to kind of go next is I think again social media, we'll use that as an example, is very easy to
Yeah.
follow a whole host of different accounts, and they're going to tell you that, hey, do these top five things or the top 10 things that elite performers do, and certainly some have some substance and
Yeah.
some have some quality info. And what I'm also interested in is not only what elite performers do to separate themselves, is I'm curious like what they avoid or what they
Mm.
don't do. And so when you think about those that you've worked with at the highest level, and again, maybe some of these might show up on the other end of those separators, like what are some of those things that you see elite performers avoid or not do that allow them to be who they are?
Zach, I've done a handful of podcasts, and that might be top three favorite questions I've ever been asked. No one has asked that before. That is really, really good. And again, I think mainstream thinking or anyone tuning into this is going to be what do they avoid? Oh, they avoid drugs, they avoid alcohol. I get that. I'm going to jump a different route on this. And this is, think about it, the best of the best. And these are all these, I think too, here's a term I use. There's a lot of false narratives on social media about how hard some guys work or what the best of the best do. And before I answer your question, sorry, but I think one of the biggest false narratives with elite performers is that they're perfect, they never have a bad day, and they have it figured out. That is such bullcrap, man. If they had that, if they were that way, they wouldn't need me. I wouldn't need my mentors, my therapists, my coaches. Like I wouldn't need those. We're all screwed up, broken people trying to get better. And I think what a lot of average performers who are, and I always say this, we try to take people from good to great or great to elite. Those gaps that are in between usually are the same gaps. Once you remove talent, size, speed, athleticism, those gaps are the same for every people, are for all the same people. Here's what I would say even the elite performers avoid now, especially in our world: confrontation. It's becoming a bad word. Conflict and confrontation. And they're actually avoiding that because it's uncomfortable. Because more, and I struggle with this personally, being really vulnerable with you, even as a coach. I'm about to turn 43 in November. I want to be liked. I don't like when people dislike me. I don't like when people say bad things about me. And a lot of elite performers now need to embrace confrontation, and they need to embrace conflict. However, the false narrative about that, and this is where I really screwed up as a coach, and probably where most of my regrets come in coaching. Conflict and confrontation doesn't always have to be yelling. It doesn't always have to be fighting. It doesn't always have to be name calling and marching out or throwing a ball at a player and kicking a guy out of the gym. And I failed at that a ton. Sometimes there is a healthy confrontation that leads to the results that we want, or a healthy confrontation that leads to us becoming the person that we're called to be or we're capable of becoming.
Mm, mm. Ah, I love that for a couple of reasons. One is it is so true. I think especially that urge that a lot of us have to want to be liked, as a coach or as a leader, and even as athletes, like to how you show up, how you train to make sure that you're cultivating or crafting this message or this persona that hopefully helps reduce any sort of conflict or negative sentiments and things like that. But I think what you stunt in the process is growth, and you stunt the truth, which, as we know, like you hear I mean, there's so many cliches and adages out there from really great coaches talking about the importance of being able to deliver and to receive the truth. And I think in order to do that, sometimes you have to be willing, as you're noting, to embrace the confrontation that can kind of sometimes go into that. It doesn't mean maybe it's always this verbal yelling match per se, but even sometimes those firm and direct words of the truth aren't always easy for some to hear. The other thing that I think is powerful, so the way I almost think about those things that players avoid, you may have heard this, but there's a sentiment around, there's like this mental model that they call multiply by zero. And in essence, like in grade school, you learn that if you take a number and you add it up, and it doesn't matter how big the number is, the moment you multiply it by zero, it actually negates the value
Yeah,
previously. Now, zero is a little bit of an absolute term, and it may not necessarily always, there are certain things that maybe are quote unquote zeros, but what you're in essence, I think, describing is the zero in the form of avoiding that conflict and confrontation that's going to diminish all the other talents, skills, strengths, and so on that you bring to the table. And I think that's powerful.
absolutely. The more mature players, the veteran players too, or even the veteran coaches we talk about, I think the area, kind of like you're saying, whether we're defining it or maybe we're seeing that zero. I've started to do some one-on-one coaching with different, leaders, and sometimes the best thing for them to do is talk about this stuff because it becomes a greater awareness. Like, I think we all got to find our kryptonite and know, hey, this is what's going to kill us. This is what's going to distract us. This is what's going to hold us back. And even just the communication and writing that down or identifying those things creates a greater awareness. And the greater our awareness is, the more likely we are to defeat it.
When you approach your coaching or the environment that you design for those that you lead, I've heard you reference the importance of bringing your strengths to the table, and I think this ties in nicely to you mentioning also like there is an acknowledgement of your kryptonite or your growth areas, and taking and allocating time to hone those things. But for you, when you think about training elite performers, how do you strike that balance of, doubling down on your strengths and being what you're good at, but also then developing those areas that are maybe lacking?
Absolutely. That's something that's so important with players because I think they struggle with two things. One, instant gratification, and two, confidence. They want results now, 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 now. They want them yesterday, actually, if it was possible. And then they're gonna, as soon as they don't see results, or maybe they get a little criticism, or the game or the performance doesn't go how they want, they start to question their work or question their plan, and therefore end up lacking confidence. The two things that we are adamant about, and again, this is really philosophy driven in developing others. One, and this is kind of one of our key statements, you have to become great at what you're good at. If you are good at a couple things, like, and those are, again, your strengths, we have to maximize those. If you, and again, this is if you want to be at perform at an extremely high level, we have to be great at those things. So you got to be great at what you're good at. I always use the example of Dame being at Weber State. Damian Lillard, phenomenal player. He was a very good shooter. Now he's one of the best shooters in the game. He went from good to great, great to elite. He was a very good ball handler and pick and roll player. We maximize those things. Here's the truth telling side about weaknesses, though, what people don't realize. I work with two guys where just probably like hitting or pitching for you guys, one of ours shooting the ball, it's mental for them. It's hard for them. They don't believe all the time. They might not ever be a Steph Curry or Damian Lillard type shooter. What they have to realize, and this is point number two, is that's okay. However, we do have to turn a weakness into at least an adequate strength. Just has to be adequate. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world. Zach, you might have a better example for this for me, and I'd love your feedback. But if a kid is failing in a subject in school, I just look at it very simply. They're failing in a subject in basketball, like their left hand isn't good enough. Well, their left hand might not ever be an A. Well, it doesn't have to be. It's got to at least be a C. We got to at least pass the class. So those two things, and you could tell like how convicted I am about them. We're going to identify our two strengths, and we're going to become great at what we're good at. We're going to double down on that, like you said. And then if there are some inadequate skills that we're failing at, we have to at least get them to an adequate level, knowing that, hey, they might not ever get us over the hump, but at least they won't hold us back.
Mm, mm. With that, where I'd be kind of curious, you've mentioned Damien obviously a couple of times now, and I know the history goes a long way back, all the way to Weber State, and I can only imagine how you've seen him grow in different ways, not just on the physical side and then on the basketball side, but in a variety of different ways. I'm kind of curious because like I think we all now see the Damian Lillard that shows up, on SportsCenter or social media highlight reels and things like that. And I'm curious for you how you have seen him go through that good to great,
Mm-hmm.
great to elite process, and just kind of what you've maybe learned by observing and watching him along the way.
Zach, I'm gassing you up and giving you too many compliments. You're gonna be like top five questions because I get sick of all these basketball podcasts. All they want to do is ask me the same questions about Damian Lillard all the time, and I get it, and it's great. He's a superstar, but the question you just asked me, I don't think anyone has before. So you're like
Mm,
two for two on this one. So kudos to you. I've learned so much from him as a coach and as a person. And this is where I get excited to coach coaches and pour into coaches. And I know you're diving into that, same realm professionally because it's an advantage in today's game. These coaches are the ones communicating and touching these players, more than anybody. So if we fill up the leader, they'll be able to fill up the player. But I think what we miss as coaches, here's I'm going to give you a couple things, if you don't mind, on what I've learned from him. One, just the totality you spend with the player over time is so rewarding and so worth it. You might have goals, expectations, but to put a ceiling on it or to put a lid on it, you never know what could happen. And I think Dame and I have trained, I don't even know, but it's something like 15, 16, 17 years now. And sometimes it's not, I mean, that's a ton. But what if you get to work with a young player for 3 years? That is a ton of time that you'll get to learn about him, from him, and you're going to grow as much as a coach as well. Some of these young players, want to work with me now, and they're like, Phil, how'd you get so smart? How'd you know this? Well, I've already experienced with a guy who's damn near fought every battle, over the last 17 years. So there's a wisdom and experience level that I got from him because we stuck together for so long. And I think that's something, I mean, I don't know how to put a pin on it, but man, Zach, like I got to learn because we stuck together so long, because we did so much. The second thing, and you preach this a ton, I know, but the level of self belief that comes from how you talk to yourself is unbelievable. And he's the best athlete. I've worked with a couple football programs now. He is the best athlete I've ever been around, the best individual at how he talks to himself. And like it's made me talk to myself better. And as he grew and became a man, from the 18-year-old that I first started coaching to 30 years old, he would call me out and he's like, Phil, you sound soft. You sound negative. The way you're talking to yourself, like you're not talking to yourself like a somebody. And I've started to share this with different teams and organizations. When you talk to yourself the right way, you could convince yourself as well. And once you convince yourself and talk to yourself the right way, it naturally comes out into talking to and convincing others. And
mm,
Zach, like just to see him do that day, and he's not perfect by any means. He struggles, he loses confidence at times, but man, it was just phenomenal. And here's the last thing I want to say, because this is so dang important, and it's embarrassing because I failed at it so freaking much. But then looking back on his development, I always get the question, and I get sick of it. Did you think he was going to be that good? Did you? No, I didn't. I doubted it. I thought maybe he could be second round pick, late first round pick. But here's what I learned from him: development doesn't always just come in steps, or like people always want to know when does the light switch flip? When did it flip? I don't always think it's that. What I think happens, Zach, and I learned from him, there are pillars along the way that he faced, figured out, grew up in. Sometimes a pillar may have looked like an obstacle that he had to overcome. And each pillar just led to another one, personally and professionally, to get where he is. And I think so many times when I was younger, I was looking for that switch to flip or the light bulb to come on, and just stay, instead of saying, like, hey, here's the pillar, here's where we got to build, here's what we got to do, and then look at that kind of next landmark along the way. And as you take one after the other, you could see how they compounded and how they accumulated together. And he ends up being the individual, the leader, and the competitor that he is today.
Mm. What's a constant in everybody's journey is those obstacles, those different challenges that they're going to confront. And yet within all of that, the importance of your internal belief and how you talk to yourself really like kind of stands out in what you're describing. And then like obviously you got to see that firsthand with Damian during the course of not only his time at the collegiate level, but all this time, 15, 16, 17 years now that
Yes.
it's been that you all have spent time together. Where I'd be curious, and I don't know if this is maybe building off of how you saw him develop that, or if it's with other guys that you've worked with, but as a coach, when you see somebody that is maybe wavering in that internal self-belief, or it's on these kind of it's getting tested, could you think of a moment or a manner in which how you approach kind of trying to help them reframe and or yeah, reframe that kind of their self-talk?
I don't want to sound like, or I don't want to act like I'm trying to sound like a genius. I think that's so important, and I struggle with it so much. We want to do the work on the front end because we know that is coming on the back end. Kind of like I told you, like we don't just prepare guys to be successful, we prepare guys to fail. I know that sounds kind of bad, but one thing that I think destroys their self talk, actually, I'm sorry, two things, is a level of comparison. They're comparing themselves to others or even themselves to maybe a version of themselves that they aren't yet. And then the other one is distraction. They're distracted by external voices, maybe bad things, they're putting into their mind or their body, whatever, just, comparison and distraction. So one thing we try to clearly define before the season starts. I make these kind of little cheat sheets for each guy, and it's a little graphic. We call them player identity sheets. And I know you were talking about, different think tanks and how much we could connect, previously. This is something I share a lot of places, and I sit down with a player one on one, and we talk about who you really are, personally, professionally. What are those strengths you bring to the table? What are those developmental keys that you're working on? And developmental means, hey, we're not perfect at them yet. So we're trying to identify, define, and have great clarity, because we know high clarity equals high performance, and have great clarity on who we are and who we're becoming. So as soon as that self-talk gets negative, or as soon as we start struggling with comparison or distraction, we go right back to that identity sheet and we review those 4 or 5 core areas. And Zach, just as you coach, as much as I do, you don't have to hit all 5 areas. Usually it's just one they're starting to struggle with, or maybe it's two, one they're struggling with, and one they just got to be reminded of. And I've done that with the best players who people think would never struggle with confidence. And I do it with 18-year-old college superstars who don't know if they're on foot or horseback half the time, get into the gym. So having that done, and here's the big word we use, having that done with the level of intentionality. I don't think so many coaches are just kind of, again, our separator, how you show up. We just kind of show up and figure it out. We want to show up and be intentional. Intentional means we're doing things deliberately and done on purpose. So we are doing that identity sheet to remind them who they are, what they're about on purpose for when good things or bad things arise. And that's huge for their self-talk. And I would say for us, I bet 9 out of 10 times like you said, it reframes, but it also re-engages, reframe, but they're able to get re-engaged with that identity that they once told themselves they are when they were in a very good place.
Mm. What's important about that is it's easy to read, a textbook or all these mental game, personal development books, and a lot of them now dive in deep to self-talk and the importance of what you say out loud as well as internally. Um, but what I appreciated in your response and how you make this very practical is you back up and you make sure that there's a foundation there from an identity perspective and how that can then influence and show up the manner in which the actual content of our self-talk. But also too, it goes the other way too, where what you say out loud can start to shape your identity, and so I appreciate the fact that like let's start with that foundation. It's almost like I'm imagining a tree where the roots are the identity. That's the thing that's going to really help you stay anchored whether whatever conditions may come up. Because we know self-talk, if those are the leaves, for example, in the outer periphery, like they can be really prone to the circumstances, to the weather conditions when you
Yeah.
have a bad game
Yeah.
or something happens off the field or off the court. But your roots are really what keep you anchored. And then the other thing that you said on the beginning of that that's really important is you talked about, you didn't use this word, but what I heard you in essence describe is competence, that when you develop competence, that obviously is going to help fuel and foster your confidence. And so it goes hand in hand. We can't just separate these things, physical and mental. And so I appreciate just kind of those were the two biggest things that I'm kind of hearing you describe as like to help foster that self-talk.
Zach, I wanted to interrupt you so bad right there because you
Yeah.
just threw me a bone that I needed. I really needed this because a little bit of a tangent here, and I'm going to be selfish on this. What you just said with competence, I had a tweet this previous summer. I worked with more college players than I ever have the last 5 years. Again, usually my time is devoted to working with NBA players or college coaches, on the development side. But this year in Phoenix, we took quite a few college players out and we let them train with us, me and my team, and we developed them. And I put out this tweet. I can't recite it by heart, but I just said, and it was about after 2.5, 3 weeks of working with them. I said they are physically stronger than like I ever remember these college kids being, but they are mentally weaker. They are confident on Instagram and social media, but they are fragile on the inside. They are super intelligent. They have all this knowledge and information, but they're super immature. So I said those things and like people loved it. And I've actually had like two different organizations bring me out and ask me to speak just because of that tweet. And they're like, talk about this and how. But what I did is I had to look within and to our staff, and I was like, why aren't these guys resilient enough then? And so we looked at like why they were lacking resilience, and I came up with like 5 C's of resilience, like the letter C, and the one I put in there, and I was like, God, this might just sound too complicated, or like, yeah, you're smiling because you know what I'm about to say, but if they're going to be resilient, or any of us are, and I shared this presentation in at Houston to about 300, high school coaches, in San Antonio about 300 high school coaches. If we're going to be confident, or we're going to have resilience, and confidence is the last C, by the way, but man, that middle C, I swear on everything, was exactly what you just said. You have to be competent, and these players aren't competent enough in what's going on between the space between their ears, or what's going into their development. So the fact that you just said competence gives me like a hammer and a nail to be like, it's sticking in my 5 C's, because I didn't know if I should move it to 4, but I think competence is such an important piece.
It is, and I don't know where sometimes the disconnect comes externally or in society where we all understand that from a physical development and physical training standpoint, the importance of conditioning to build competence in the physical skills. But what you're also describing here is the importance of that on the mental side as well,
Yes.
and the importance of fostering that competence to be resilient, to be more composed, to be more self-aware, whatever the case might be. And so where I think could be a helpful place to go is like, could you like, let's put the microscope on for a moment when you're in the gym and you're coaching and you're teaching, and how you're creating an environment not only for your players to enhance their physical abilities, but what's it look like for you to also train them from a mindset or decision making standpoint?
Absolutely. The biggest thing I think, and here's where I'm going to jump on a little bit of a soapbox. I don't want to be the old coach on my lawn yelling at everybody. And I was sharing this with you a little bit, Zach, but I think in basketball, the developmental piece is falling behind compared to other sports. And I told you this previously, and I'm not just saying it because I'm on the podcast, but baseball development, the plan, the organization, the connection, everything you guys are doing is so far ahead of the game in basketball. I truly, truly believe that. Football, I've worked with some football programs. I think the professionalism of basketball is so far behind football, like how coaches show up and do their job. There's times I've worked with staffs, and I'll share this with you. I'm not going to say which staff it was, but it was an NBA staff. Most NBA staffs have about 15 people. Shoot, some college staffs have over 10 people now. But out of 15 coaches who were going to go work with players on an NBA team, some coaches just have one guy, some have two, maybe sometimes it was group. Out of 15 coaches, Zach, I promise you, 4 of them would actually go out there with their own written plan to work out with the players. The other ones were like, we're just going to do this, or I just thought about it. So when you're talking about not only enhancing skills, but it might be concepts, or it might be like, I love the term mental skills training. You got to train mental skills, going back to that word intentional, what I do, and again, I'm not as smart as some of you guys doing this full time, but I try to write 1 or 2 things at the top of the workout plan, show the player that. Like tonight, I'll probably work with Ryan Dunn from the Phoenix Suns. I'll have the 4 core skill or concept things we're going to get better at. But at the top, like one of the things we will talk about with him is don't react, respond. We can't react to every miss. We can't react to every mistake. We try to be completely intentional and communicate those things before we start the workout. So now whenever it's going on in the workout, I could address it, they could address it. They know how to do it at an extremely higher level. A player who I just worked with the LA Lakers, one of them, and I think this is huge for mental skills training, the ability to breathe, decompress. Like he told me he played a preseason game. He's like, I don't think I was breathing out there when it came to shooting. Like so as much as we were doing, and again, man, and I'm not trying to overtalk, on your podcast, but the thing you were saying, we believe in building a foundation at such an extremely high level. And it's even, like biblical. A house built on sand will not stand. It's like the wind came, the rain blew, the streams rose, and it knocked down the house that was built on sand. But when your house is built on a rock, on a strong foundation, that's not just with your physical body. That's with your mind, your heart, your mental skills training that you've put in. Now you're going to be able to withstand those storms. So just that little 2-minute talk before about, hey, we're going to react. And again, I just gave you 2 quick examples, but we do not want to react. We want to respond. So when we miss a shot, we're not reacting. A response is maybe a question to a coach. A response is maybe an adjustment. I need to get my elbow through more. And now, again, you're going to be like, Phil, do these guys get sick of you? Yes, they do. But we're also going to define and label what responses we want. Hey, what are some good responses you could have today? And make the player say it. Hey, if it's batting, my response is every time, and if I swing and miss, instead of putting my head down, I'm going to put my chin to my shoulder and keep my head up. That is a winning, confident response. Hey, the other one, breathing. In between reps, I'm going to breathe, and whether you have a mantra or say something or think of just a teaching point or a cue or a focal point. We want to breathe and say that focal point to ourselves. Sorry, I
Mm.
get passionate, but you could tell this is obviously that's why I was excited to do this with you too. But this is something we dive into at a deep level. But also, going back to better and different, there are very few coaches or leaders committing to doing this stuff. Like I said, if you walk out there, there's 15 coaches and three of them, only three or four had a written plan. We could separate ourselves by being better and different and just doing those things other people won't do.
Where my mind goes is realizing that I didn't allocate enough time for this conversation because I feel like I would love to almost have another couple hours to like keep diving into this because I think you're bringing up so much richness and some depth in these responses. And on one hand, I think the point being about the intentionality for us as coaches. I think it's something that, we're transitioning into the quote unquote off season, which is a terrible word. Like there's no such thing as an off season at, collegiate or professional sport or those types of things. However, there is a clear expectation for players to go spend the next few months honing their craft, to strengthening their strengths,
Oh,
to honing their growth areas. And it's
come on,
also like
Zach. Say it. Say it, Zach. I agree. Come on, baby.
what you're in essence highlighting too is like, are we looking also in the mirror or turning that around on ourselves? And how are we growing alongside? So the same thing, that's just from a growth and development standpoint. What you're also describing is we have the full expectation to have players show up and be intentional in how they train, how they prepare. Well, how are we being intentional in how we prepare
Preach,
to then
Zach.
train?
Let's go. Come
Yeah,
on. Preach.
this is why I'm like, shoot, we need
This
a
is
lot
like
more.
podcast number two, and we got to be careful because, yeah, but still,
We're just setting up a good primer for part two, which
there we go.
I'm not saying that as lip service. I very much want to have that because I'm realizing we're not even going to get into all the things that I really wanted to. But also, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and I don't know if I'm making a connection to something that you view in a different way, but I heard you say something to the effect of higher clarity can help create higher performance, or
Hmm.
is a driver for higher performance. What I think you're also signaling in what you're describing is the manner in which how we as coaches and leaders can foster that clarity or create
Yes.
clarity. And some of that comes down to not only how we define things, but also, or not only how we define terms and drills and coaching concepts, but how we define expectations, how we define standards. And I think that's one of the biggest ways in which there can be failures in leadership is a
Yeah.
failure to do those things because the byproduct of a failure to do it is a lack of clarity. And as we know, like one of the biggest, most anxiety provoking feelings that people endure is uncertainty. We hate uncertainty as human beings, and yet we as coaches can play such a pivotal role in being an antidote to that by how we define things. So I'm very appreciative of you exploring that.
I love it. Yeah, my mentor, Rod Olson, that's where I got that from. High clarity equals high performance. And most leaders I work with, most head coaches, I think one thing I'm great at is helping them find clarity, whether it's asking them questions, kind of organizing thoughts, eliminating other thoughts. But yeah, and going back to it, if the leader doesn't have clarity, how in the world is the player going to have that? We
Hmm.
don't want to be a jack of all trades and a master of none, whether that's with our communication, our culture, our standards, and again too, not diving too deep, but like if you want to hold someone accountable and you want to really be able to challenge them, which I think, and again, it doesn't have to always be conflict of fights, but be able to hold them accountable and challenge them, you have to have great clarity in order to do that.
Hmm. Hmm. That's so good. That's really good, Phil. Where, again, I want to be cognizant and mindful of your time here. And again, one of my first things will be like, all right, when can we do part two to this? And also, I'm looking forward to us getting together for coffee or coming down and watching, what you actually are in your element in the gym. But
Absolutely.
um, where I think it's a fitting maybe place to put a bow on this is there's a question that I do like to pose to all the coaches and leaders that I've been able to have join me on this show. And it's maybe pivoting a little bit, but I'm very intrigued to hear kind of where it comes up for you is I like to ask, Phil, what's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to share or to talk about?
I hate that question, and I go to church out here in Arizona and talks about humility. Like yesterday was about humility. So like, you try to be humble, and you don't want to talk about stuff. Um, I need to share this more, not because it's about me, but even with Be Better, Be Different, kind of being high performance mindset consulting, we've actually partnered a nonprofit with that. It's called the Be Better, Be Different Legacy Foundation. And we have 3 to 5 high schools we pour into here in the Valley. And these are kids who don't have much at all or don't have much of a chance. And we try to provide mentorship, leadership, life skills for them. We supply them with Thanksgiving meals, Christmas meals, just like, and the word is crazy you said this, and I'm glad we're kind of closing on this. But I just wrote down 2 words you said, and I think this is awesome, Zach. You said richness and depth. We might not have the biggest nonprofit. We might not get to impact enough people, it seems like, but there is a level of richness and depth that we're helping these kids with because, and I'll close on this. Everyone wants to work with the high performers and help them and the all-stars, but I do think there is a huge avenue and a huge gap we're all called to dive into, and that's for those rookies, the young people, the rebels, the rejects, the renegades. Those guys. We got to be able to help them, and so that is one thing I was able to start with this because of the success we had, and I am really proud of that because of the kids we get to help here in the Valley.
I think it's a wonderful example, and I appreciate you shining a little bit of a spotlight on it. I know it's something that is near and dear to your heart and important, not only for what the work that you'll be doing, but also how that aligns with so many of your values, things that I've gotten a chance to pull out of not only this conversation, but what I've gotten to hear that you've expressed on social media, as well as through other conversations that you've had. And so Phil, I know your time, especially I'm mindful of the fact that we're having this conversation right here at the beginning of preseason and basketball season really getting underway. And I know you're serving a lot of other contexts and populations as well. So I'm beyond grateful of you taking some time to have this conversation. And again, we're going to call it part one
Awesome.
because I have a whole list of other things I was excited to get in with here with you, and I will certainly be saving them for our next.
Awesome. Zach, you do a great job. Thanks again for having me. Really
Yeah.
appreciate you.